business is better. The overall
A
business is
little late.
better, even if there's a loss. And so sub optimization uh, uh, just really struck me when I read that. Just wow, that's really counterculture right now, where they're just throwing out anything that's losing money or not optimized. Just companies are just getting rid of it.
I can't remember who it was. I don't think it was Russ Akoff, but somebody was talking about the human body as a system. And if you just take, like he used a couple of examples. He said, in your body, there's not a most important organ. In a system,
Look
there's
at
not a most important part. He said, and there's huge interdependency. If you just take three things, your leg muscles, your heart, and your brain, it says what your legs are doing depends on what your brain's doing. What your brain's doing depends on what your heart's doing. It's everything's interactive and interdependent and trying to.
But even if you look at it from a sustainability standpoint, and you say, well, these boundaries of the system now don't only happen internally, because even if you use the body as an example, the air that you breathe in, it also becomes part of the system. Yeah,
Yep.
and it being processed by the system, and then it goes back out to also support the system. So you recognize as the aim changes, also the system continues to evolve by the boundaries, and the boundaries also influence what happens in the system. So I think that idea of the boundaries of the system is also a critical component to show the whole interconnectedness and integration of the of this web of dependence sort of a thing. I think those are some key insights, and I think it really lays a good foundation for the future chapters in terms of profound knowledge and recognizing um the inability to really separate the system or to break the system into those individual profit centers, because we might actually be getting rid of a profit center that is actually the engine or the heart. It might be the heart, but but you don't really see what the heart is doing. Or because people don't see, oh, the heart not doing anything, so we think we could take it out, and then you actually shut down your major operation. And I think there was an example on the Deming Institute some years ago about I think it was a Russell Akoff lecture where they were talking about a paper factory that was in a loss making they did a loss making effort because of who the customer was. And they were showing his unwillingness to actually give up that loss making effort because of what was happening within the whole of the system. So sometimes we have to look beyond just these profit centers and what making a profit and what not making a profit, but recognize how it actually fits into the wider system of things, because a problem could be caused by removing um, some part of the system without knowledge.
Yeah, that's a Russ Akoff story having to do with a very expensive paper that they sold minimally, but the person they sold it to had a huge influence all over the place. Not and as a result, the whoever knew was coming in said, "Hey, that's not making us any money. We ought to quit manufacturing that." He said, "If we quit manufacturing that, we're going to lose a whole bunch of other paper because this person is big in the publishing industry. And so we want to support whatever she wants because we'll sell way more paper altogether if we keep selling her that paper that's not making us any money."
Yeah, I read that in one of the books from Xerox. Yeah, the story was in there too. Yeah. But
Deming
HQ,
introduces here too a figure that he thinks was pretty important to helping him help the Japanese. And that's called a production viewed as a system. He has said elsewhere that it doesn't have to be production. It can be it could be a school, it could be a government institution, it could be somebody who's delivering services. But the idea is whatever the system is and whatever the type of system it is, you need a view that allows people to see how the system pieces interact and how they fit into that system. And without that catwalk view, he says you're gonna end up with loads of problems. And what's interesting to me is that I started when we first started teaching classes here at Rocketdyne in the Deming way of doing things. And put the figure 6 up on a board and explain what it is. You know, hey, here's the system, and you go through a little bit. And then you say, Deming claims that that's why the Japanese were able to, within 10 years, bury Detroit because they understood that diagram. I said, let's see, it looks like a simple diagram, how well we in this room understand that. So I start on one side of the room and say, well, you guys are the stage 0 guys. You guys are the design and redesign guys. And I go around the room, make sure everybody knows what area he's in. And I said, okay, now we're going to check how well we understand the diagram. And I point to production and say, everybody in the room who's downstream of production, raise your hand. And I have never had a class where everyone raises hands. And I said, you don't get the diagram if, no matter where I point and say who's downstream, all the hands don't go up. It's a simple diagram, but that doesn't mean you understand it.
Because again, to me, even understanding that diagram is also breaking down traditional hierarchy
Yes.
and recognizing relationships as to who is handing off to who and who needs to interact with who. So that changes the nature of the relationships, the communication, the thinking about a process, and recognizing that a process don't necessarily just depend on a department, sort of a focus. So we have been actually kind of entrenched into a departmental focus and then filtering a thing through the boards, but not recognizing why do these two departments need to communicate, or as it relates to the aim of the system. So that sort of view kind of also helps persons to take a look at how what they do contributes to the whole, as opposed to contribute to what I am going to do, and I'm going to send this out. And once I send this out, anyhow I send this out is okay, whether or not the next person in the system could, or in the process, could actually use it. So you get more considerate of your handoffs, you get more considerate of your interactions, and even if that interaction is with the customers as well as the suppliers, because this production view of a system too is not just a linear approach, it's also a circular approach. So eh, everything that comes through, whether it be equipment, materials, energy, information, feeds back now into information to redesign the system, to change the processes, to change the supply, so as to do research and improve not only the processes but the system of production as it is defined. So I found that very useful to in discussing even the circular economy.
And clearly people, even before Deming's New Economics, if you go back to his 14 points and out of the crisis, they misunderstood the point. As I recall, it's point 5 that says, talks about continuous improvement. It doesn't say continuously improve everything everywhere. It says continuously improve the system of production and service. It's the system you're trying to make better. So if cutting back somewhere helps the system, that might be good news. If spending more somewhere helps the system, that might be good news. But just making the individual areas better, quote, depending on how you describe better, it is dangerous and may put you in a bad situation. I know a rocket company who designed a rocket, and one of the parts in it, several parts, it's a disc, and it has blades that go around the outside of the disc that have to get welded on, and there's variation in the diameter of the disc, and there's variation in the width of the blades. And the company instituted continuous improvement and said every department had to have a continuous improvement effort going. And so the blade guys ran off and decided they were going to improve the blades. And they noticed there was quite a bit of variation in the width. So they spent time and energy reducing that variation and did a really great job of making all the blades nearly the same width. Unfortunately, when they sent the first lot of blades down to assembly so they could be put on the discs, they had a problem that stopped assembly, because since the discs are different diameters, when the blades all had more variation than their thickness, what the guys did is they stacked the blades up around the outside of the disc before they made the weld. And if they had a gap or an overlap, they'd exchange blades until all the gaps and all the overlaps were removed. When they got the new set of blades, you could change. It didn't matter what you changed. There was no way they were going to get an assembly that had no gaps and no overlaps. So they probably won an award for their ability to reduce the variation in the blades, but they shut the shop down.
When I was looking at figure 6 too, I think the big one for me is like, who is your consumer or who's your customer? Because that changes everything. And just for me as a classroom teacher, is my customer getting students to pass this dumb state test, or is it getting my students to be lifelong learners? And so, and those two things don't play nicely, and neither do a good company with a good system and shareholders.
The shareholders may not, unlikely to have the insight that people in the organization, if it's run properly, have. And so they don't recognize that what's being done to the shareholder looks like, what a stupid idea. You're selling that paper that makes you no money at all. The people on the inside say, well, it doesn't make us money in the paper sale, but it makes us money in the sale of all the other paper because of who this person is that's buying that. And that's another reason why it's certainly stockholders. You have to respect stockholders and do what you can for them, but you can't let the stockholders run the organization. It's the wrong group running the organization. And if you want to stay in business and be in business for a long time, you have to be aware of stockholders, but catering to them is going to be a problem for you. I like what in this chapter what Nita Bakaitis, she's an interesting lady, did with putting circles around each of the items, each of the areas in Deming's system of production viewed as a system, and saying, that's how we do business today. So each one of those independent parts has its own budget, its own evaluation of return on investment. And I know for sure, whenever you're studying the cause of a problem, if it shows up in production, you're spending all your time and energy finding out what in production caused the difficulty, ignoring the cause can be from anywhere in the system. And taking Nita's example, if you are managing a football club, football team, my football is not American football, it's soccer, but at least we call it soccer here. If you were managing a football team, taking the players individually and managing them separately, like Nikita's chart, you wouldn't even consider doing that. The whole idea is to practice and work so that everybody can work in a way that helps the team as a whole, not any of the individuals. And in a baseball team, it'd be even more stupid. How about if they said, you're a right fielder and here's the part of the field you have responsibility for. Here's a center fielder. And so you draw boundaries where each person has, and then you can see two of them running for a fly ball and then say, wait a minute, it's out of my territory. It's your problem. Nobody would do that, but we don't recognize that's what we're asking organizations to do when we impose the prevailing style of management.
So one of the things that I was like kind of wondering about is, that it's important, the interrelationships, but or the interdependencies in a system, but that's also a little bit intangible compared to the getting into the details of a part-wise. So partly that is also one of the reasons why the focus is easily goes to part-wise management of a system versus focusing on the interdependence, because it is a little bit relatively intangible. Because if somebody doesn't know this concept of systems thinking, they can easily get lost in the details. So is it because the one of the owner of the system has the best view of the system, like he can see all these different parts, and he's also probably the owner is the one who is respond or kind of owns that aim of the system, right? The outcome, what the system is meant to do. So is it the responsibility then becomes of this owner or the leader of the system to constantly remind the people in the system, to remind them of these interdependencies, which are like intangible, because people tend to forget and then they start to focus on what they need to do, right? So my question is it the leaders imperative that they maintain, always bring the people back to focus on, hey, you need to focus on these interdependencies, don't get lost?
And yes, and it's the Deming said that it's an obligation of management to do those sorts of things. And what's interesting is Deming talks about the system has a boundary, and the bigger you draw the boundary, the more impact you can have with that system. However, the harder it is to manage. So you've got to find a spot where you can manage it and get where you want to go. But no matter where you draw the boundaries, you need to recognize that there are things not inside your boundary that have a huge impact on your system. And so you have to learn to be able to deal with them. And the same thing happens if you get down to the macro, the microstructure. If I'm working at my desk and I want to improve what I'm doing, I'm drawing the boundary maybe pretty narrowly to come up with ideas on what I could do. But then I have to back up and say, okay, when I do this one of these things, how does it affect everybody I interact with? When I do this, how does it affect them? So you have to expand it and say, okay, yeah, that's better for you, but it's not so good for anybody else. So maybe that one gets set aside and you don't try to make that happen. But you have to continually remind people that while they can focus and while they're focused, it may be important to draw boundaries, but the boundaries don't exist. And whatever you're going to do has an impact on everybody else. And you need, and I remember somebody came here and helped us understand when you're looking at how to improve what you're doing and you go to your customer, internal customer, and say, how can I help you? You're probably not going to get any really great ideas because that person doesn't really know what you do, so doesn't have any idea how he can help. Says what you need to do is go watch what your customer, internal customer, does with your product, and then ask questions about, hey, would this help? Would this help? And that will give you a better opportunity to do something that would be useful downstream. The example I used to use in class was I've been producing this report every week, and I produce it, 3-hole punch it, put it in a binder. It's generally 5 to 8 pages, and I take it to the guy. And then I ask him how I can help, and he says, I don't know, you're doing a pretty good job. I like it. So, but then I decide to stick around and see what he's going to do. And he takes the binder and he opens it up, and he unclips the binder, and he takes all the pages out, puts the binder back together, staples the pages together, and starts reading through them. I said, would it be better if I gave you these things stapled together? Oh, yeah, that would be really useful. He couldn't ask for it. It didn't even occur to him to ask for it. But watching, you can see it's also what the Japanese talk about, going to the gemba, going to where the action is and the work is being done and looking at it, just observing it. And from that, getting ideas about how you might be able to help. And yes, that's definitely, and purpose and aim, purpose of the organization is something that comes from management. It has to, as Deming points out, even if you don't define a purpose, clearly the organization has a purpose, because if it didn't, you wouldn't know who to hire. Do I hire a backhoe guy, or do I hire a welder? I don't know. What's your purpose? And that's a management thing. And frankly, management doesn't do a good job with that. And I got the person I reported to at NASA, I don't know, this maybe 10 years ago, she used to call me her philosopher, but I got her to grasp the importance of purpose. And that was the good news. The bad news was her light bulb went on about purpose. So she sent out a memo to everybody that reported to her directly, and those of us down the chain that reported to her, and said, I want you to write the purpose of your job and send it to me. So I sent her a note and I said, you got a good idea, and that we all ought to know the purposes of our jobs, but there's a problem, because it has to start at the top. There's a purpose for the organization. And if you know the purpose of the organization and you're a management or executive, you might be able to figure out what your job is to achieve that purpose. And if you share your purpose downstream, then those people might be able to. But I said, if we don't have a purpose for the organization, NASA really doesn't have a clearly defined purpose. And the head of quality, who this lady was, didn't really have a specified purpose. I said, until those things happen, it's crazy to ask the people down below to describe the purpose. How are they supposed to know what the purpose is? They know what they're supposed to do. They got a set of directions. That's what they do. What's the purpose? I don't have any idea. It's what the directions say to do. And to get that to happen, you have to have the overall view and then the wherewithal to help people see how they fit in and continue to remind them we want to improve the whole thing, which might require multiple things getting changed, or maybe one thing in one area, but you can't make changes without understanding their impact on the rest of the organization, or you'll be in danger of doing what Detroit did with the transmissions and the engine, where they could reduce the cost of the whole car if they took the sensors off of the transmission and put them on the engine, I think it was. And the people that were in charge of the engine said, we ain't doing that. That makes our engine cost more. The car costs less, though. They're not in charge of the car. They're in charge of the engine. What do they care?
But I
Would
think
Deming say?
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Would Deming say like the aim of the system would be the mission statement of an organization or the company, or is that just fluff?
Yeah, you need a purpose, and he says it needs to describe. It needs to describe a lot of things, including what you're trying to do for the people. But Deming believed the same thing that Akoff believed, that the purpose of the company is to develop products, services, and people. And so the purpose of the system involves the people who are working in the system and making them better at what they do and increasing their skills and their talents. And that's something most organizational aims or purposes or statements don't really get into. They sort of ignore it.
Okay.
And it's difficult, but to come up with a clearly understandable aim, but it's really useful. I know Peaker Services that Ian Bradbury runs now, and Dick Steele founded a long time ago and ran it as a Deming-like company when he was introduced to Deming's work. And they have a purpose that they examine rather routinely, and it helps them also when they see new business they might get into, because then they look at their purpose and say, does this fit our purpose? And if the answer is no, then the choices are, should we change our purpose to encompass this, or should we abandon this idea and keep our purpose what it is now? And there's no right answer to it. It's just an evaluation that you go through. And that's rare. The Peaker Services have done a really good job with that over the years.
I think something that Lakshmi said strikes me in the sense that you gotta rethink this whole role of management, of just managing people or just tasks and activities, to bringing people together, getting a shared vision and perspective, or even common definitions as to what the aim of the organization is. And as you said, it had to be refined, but also to provide explanation as to, what the why, why are we doing this? What does this work for? How does it contribute towards the aim? I think that is also a part of the work of this visualization of the system of production, is like bringing people together to actually start to have a conversation beyond just doing tasks and activities. And I think it actually comes to life in the section that addresses the job descriptions, and recognizing that your job description has to move beyond just a list of tasks or who you're reporting to in the hierarchy, to what is this work actually for? The why, the providing an explanation, supporting us coming to a collective vision or a collective insight onto what the aim is. And then, I mean, it also connects to the operational definitions because different people may have a different meaning of aim, for instance, that sometimes you actually have um, to overcome those sort of issues, the definitional issues, the views and perspective issues. So there's work for management in this, as opposed to the task-based blame culture. If somebody makes a mistake, we managing every mistake and every performance. Oh, this person did well, and this other person didn't do well, but it's really based on our feeling per se.
So just adding on to that point real quick is it's also become the responsibility of the people or the employees. So on one hand, yes, it is management's responsibility to constantly propagate or disseminate this understanding of the aim of the system and why each part what they need to do, but it's also becomes a responsibility of the parts to understand, like they cannot constantly blame the management of like not articulating clearly, but they also need to get in and be responsible, right? Like otherwise then they need to be whatever need to be done. But the responsibility. So I think I read somewhere that the leadership is not just about who is in the top, right? Like the leadership is also can be exhibited by the people who are within the parts of the system, um, that they understand how they need to contribute to the system. In that sense, they can exhibit their leadership.
Yeah, both Deming and Russ Akoff have a view of leadership that leadership isn't a position. Leadership is action that you take. And frankly, every one of us in an organization can at the same time be a follower and a leader, because you can be leading a group to be doing this one thing because you're trying to get this other thing done over here. So you're following on one side, but you're leading on another. And Akoff makes the point that the distinction between leader and manager is an important distinction to understand. And most corporations don't have a clue. Like anybody who's in management, especially executive management, is called a leader. Some of them may be leaders, but a whole bunch of them are not leaders. There's no way. And that distinction is important. And as you pointed out, as you make people more aware of how things work together, and you grant them the offer them the possibility of helping make things better, of leading some kind of change, and encourage them to come up with ideas, they start to take on that responsibility. In Peaker Services years ago, because those people understood some of the Deming ideas, they understood a plan, do, study, act cycle, they understood how to learn, and because they understood how they fit in the organization, and because their management was steeped in Deming tradition, what they did is said, listen, if you have an idea to make a change, and in order to test it out in a plan, do, study, act cycle, you need to go get some stuff, at a hardware store or anywhere else. So you can spend up to, I think at the time, it was $1,000. You can spend $1,000 of company money to go do that. You don't have to ask anybody, just go do that. And if you send your receipts in, you get your $1,000 happens. And it does not require that your testing ends up being something really useful. It's that you had an idea, it might be useful. To know if it's useful, we have to test it. Let's go test it. But that responsibility on those people, they recognize that responsibility and they're willing to embrace it and use it purposefully to help the organization as a whole. They don't abuse it. They don't run off and do things. But it takes a lot of work to develop that environment. The organization's probably 90 people now, maybe might be 100, I don't know, somewhere between 70 and 100. But that's a remarkable way of doing business. I don't know of any other company who has such a thing.
Sorry, can you repeat the name of this company?
Oh, Peaker Services, Peaker Services. They're in Detroit. Okay. They started out overhauling huge diesel engines for trains. They got into some controls for the engines too, but I think they're still mostly overhauling these big diesel engines. And they got into some other engines that generate electricity because the similarity in the products fit what they were doing. Yeah, and Dick Steele was a really interesting guy. When he got ready to retire, he asked the employees, since he was going to retire, if they wanted to buy the company from him. He said he'd loan them the money. So he spent the last several years turning of his reign, the company, turning it into an employee-owned operation. And he found somebody, Ian Bradbury, who had worked for GM with Deming when Deming was there, and he brought him in to be in charge, and Dick went on the board to be be a board member. And that's probably 15, 16 years ago now, and they're still going strong.
So the question is, what do you see as that leaders and probably managers have to do to create that sort of environment where persons feel psychologically safe to participate and contribute and feel that level of support? Because we also operating in not only a fear-based culture, because I mean even you hear a lot in even the quality field, where people in the quality field don't themselves feel that they are leaders in their organization, and they feel like it's like us versus them with regards to management. You hear that a lot, or you see that a lot, So in terms of laying out that sort of environment that everyone could feel that they're a leader, what are some of the things that we need to think about or do?
One of the things that I can tell you, the hardest thing for me to do when I was in a position where I could prod people in the executive management to go off and do things, the most difficult thing to do was to get them to grasp, not just be able to repeat the idea, but grasp the concept that rewarding individuals and punishing individuals is really a bad thing to do, because it's not going to create cooperation. It's going to create conflict. It's going to create competition. It's crazy. You got to stop doing that. Stop doing that. And I remember at one meeting where they were looking at an award they were going to hand out to somebody. And so all of the 15 people that reported the VP of quality were in the room, and the person sponsoring, hey, this person ought to get an award. I can't remember, $200 or whatever it was. And then the VP had each person in the room say why they think this person ought to get the award based on the information they got from the person who wanted to give her an award. And I told them two things. I said, it's ironic that the person you want to give this award to lent me a copy of her book I was intrigued by, which was Alfie Kohn's Punished by Rewards. I said, so there's that irony. I said, the other thing that's problematic about this is that if you believe there are heroes, you are going to believe there are scapegoats. It's inevitable. And the output of this system is not caused by any one body or any several bodies. It's caused by the interaction of all of these things. And instead of handing out an award like this, what you ought to do every day is get up out of your desk and go down and see some of the people that work for you and tell them, thank you for doing your job. And if you're smart enough to know why they do the job or how that's used, tell them that. Hey, thanks for doing that report every week. And oh, by the way, you may not know what happens, but that report goes on and NASA uses it to help make decisions about whether they're going to launch or not launch. So it's very important you keep that up. Thank you for doing that. And just doing that kind of stuff. But it's hard to get them out of their offices, let alone to talk to their employees. And they absolutely have no feeling or understanding, apprehension in the sense that they have the ability to help change the environment so that everybody's better off. They just don't recognize it. They don't recognize what they're doing is destructive. Deming's, I think it's figure 12, the forces of destruction. That's a real thing. And it applies in schools, maybe schools especially, but it certainly applies in corporations. And I used to try to badger executives into maybe rethinking, and I'd ask them if they think rewards and recognition to employees is a good idea. I said, okay, what are you trying to get out of that? Well, we want to encourage everybody to do better things and to come up with ideas. I said, okay, but what's your purpose? What for the people? What do you want from those people? Oh, well, I want them to be competent. I want them to be willing to commit to the company. I want them to take things seriously and all that. And I said, okay, at home, what do you want for your kids? Well, I want them to learn. I want them to be competent. I want them to become independent. And I want to help them as much as I can so that they can be able to do that. And I said, so at home, do you hand out rewards and recognitions based on how well they're doing that? Sometimes the girl gets the award. Sometimes the brother gets the award. No, I'd never do that. I said, why do you do it at work? They don't have an answer. They don't even recognize how stupid it is.
One of the common arguments, I have been in situations where this exactly same discussion. So one of the common argument is people become lazy. They don't have any aspiration to do better. So that's the common thing comes up. Like if there are no rewards, then nobody is going to do their
Yeah,
best.
what's so interesting about that is people, when you get down to talking to them and you look at all of the data that they've gathered over decades, is that people want to make a difference. So they're not going to sit around doing nothing. They want to make a difference. And we don't recognize that's innate in people. And
Right.
and if you poke at people who say, well, if they weren't handing out an award to you every once in a while, would you just sit around and do nothing? Oh, not me, but everybody else does. What the hell? People really want to make a difference. In fact, that's probably one of the reasons, one of the purposes of people, to make a difference with each other, with the world around them, and some of them feel obligated to do it. Others get frustrated trying to do it, but they usually are pretty persistent, and it's remarkable what we can achieve when we all agree on our purpose and agree on our methods for achieving that purpose. It's amazing.
Right. I think probably there'll be a lot of anecdotal evidences when we say that this reward, don't have these kind of rewards and recognitions. So a lot of anecdotal evidence about people not doing things, but that could be a symptom of a system gone worse because of implementing this reward system,
Yeah.
where people have gotten used to this whole thing. So probably they are not able to go one level deeper to understand that when you don't have this at all in place, how the system would behave. Probably they don't have that experience of it. So maybe that's why they are
And
not get out of that loop.
And as Deming talks about, there's no substitute for knowledge. Some of the knowledge that's been around for at least 60 years now flies in the face of rewards making performance better. And Alfie Kohn does a lot of work and cites a lot of studies, because since he's telling people things they think are 180 degrees from reality, he has to make sure he's got a lot of information that supports what he's saying. But every experiment that they've done where they use rewards in some part of the group to solve some problem or do something, and they don't use rewards in others, the unrewarded group performs better. Every experiment says that. And yet we haven't, we somehow that hasn't gotten, we still believe B.F. Skinner that everybody works for some kind of reward. If you don't have a reward, they ain't going to do shit. That's not true. It's just not true. And the destruction that all that rewards and recognition creates. I don't remember if I told you guys, I think I did, of the secretary who was sad. And I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "Well, it's admin of the year day, and it just makes me feel bad," because she wasn't the admin of the year, and 50 other people weren't either, but somebody was, and I said something to her, trying to offer some solace, and said, "The only thing I can offer you is they're not intentionally hurting you." And she said, "It hurts anyway." It's like, yeah. So look at what we're doing to people. And we can do something different. We can. And what's different is going to give us better results. People do better at solving problems when they're not pressured by, here's a reward you might get, or whatever it is that causes the difference in performance. But all of the evidence is, and in fact, some further studies that have been done, is the bigger the reward that's offered, the more it interferes with the performance. But it's really hard, especially in the United States, but I think it's elsewhere too. It's particularly hard to get away from the heroes and the scapegoats, and rewarding the heroes and punishing the scapegoats. That's just, and I see it all over the place, our hero rewarding. somebody scores the winning basket, scores 110 to 109. That basket isn't any more winning than the other 100 points scored. Come on. But we do love heroes. And frankly, the biggest heroes are probably the people that are working very hard to keep their families together and to feed them and to get them schooled and educated. Those are heroes, and they're the ones getting kicked in the ass.
Yeah, the people who ensure that the system runs smoothly, so there are no issues, so they go unrecognized and
Yeah,
rewarded
yeah.
because everything. So there was a book by I think Dan Heath or Chip Heath called Upstream. So yeah, he mentions about
Upstream sounds
I think
interesting.
it's Upstream. Yeah. So yeah, I think there was a story in in the beginning of the book where um, there's a guy like they keep finding kids that are drowning, and then at some point he stops saving them, and then he goes, I'm going to go upstream to find the guy who is pushing all these guys into the stream. Because there's no point in keep saving these kids where keep on getting and there's no reward really for doing that kind of work where you go and figure out the person who is pushing the kids into the stream, but you get reward for the heroic effort of you diving into the stream and getting the saving the kids out of the water. That gets the media attention. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you're working in an organization and you're doing some of that upstream work, what is pretty much goes unrecognized is that you are doing that work, and that's what everybody should be doing. And it's how you can get the organization to be continuously improving and 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 deal with the future. When you're just rewarding whatever's been going on and punishing whatever's been going on, you're not helping the future at all.
So one thing I do in my classroom is, and I teach engineering and I get to give kids their own projects. Um, I make it a service project around school. Like they have to go find a problem out there and then come up with a solution for it. And one of the things I encourage is definitely failure because I think they learn the most by failing. And I said that in a staff meeting once, and everybody's like, "What?" It's like, I'm sorry, these are children. That failure is how you learn. And so, what I tell them, like their grade depends on, is not getting it correct, failing, doing all your math right, whatever the thing is, but it's writing a reflection at the end of how they truly learned from the process and what they got out of it. And so really everybody gets an A in my class. So students really like it, but it does take them a long time because they get into these projects and there's never me been like, hurry up, you have to get this done. It's like, hey, you've got all the time in the world. Oh, you need research. Let's do this research together. Let me help you do this. And that's my favorite joy rather than teaching a class that's, tested or I have to follow these stupid state standards or whatever. Because
Yes.
I feel like they learn so much more about themselves and they get confidence because
Yeah.
they've been punished by grades their entire lives. And so when they have this thing where they get to be involved and be like the master of their own learning, it's important. But I've also been reading a lot of Alfie Kohn lately too, and
Yes.
listening to his podcast. So I've been incorporating as much as I can in my classes.
Yeah. It was interesting to me. Brendan was diagnosed, or I don't know, 4 or 5 years old, as having ADHD, and I was listening to an Alfie um, presentation, and so I went up to him at the break, and because at the time the people who were talking about ADHD said, if you can structure things and put things, in small bits, so somebody doesn't have to pay attention for a long time to make progress, and then give them rewards, then that can help move them along. And I read about that, and I looked at Alfie's work, and I said, I see a mismatch there. So I asked Alfie, I said, well, is there a point, if you have somebody with ADHD, in trying to use rewards to help them move on to something where they don't need the rewards? And so if they have this handicap like this handicap like ADHD, and he looks at me and says, "What makes you think ADHD is a handicap?" He says the handicap is on the part of the school who can't deal with variation in attention spans of students. And I said, duh.
Mhm.
So we didn't pay any attention, and he managed to get through college, including 4 years, the last 2 of which he spent in Iowa, which has winter, which surprised the hell out of me, but that he survived. Being a Californian and a Brazilian, winter isn't one of their things. Yeah, the idea of a system, and Deming calls it, in Profound Knowledge, he's talking about appreciation of a system or for a system. And he's not trying to make you or requiring us to be systems thinker professionals like Donella Meadows or Russ Akoff or anybody else you can think of. It's that you understand that things are connected to each other, that they're interdependent, and that the outcome is a result of all those interactions, not of any one or two things in the system. He's not asking for any more than that. That's sufficient. And certainly, if you need help, you can go find help. Hey, I got this far, but now I'm lost, and don't think I'm competent to do more. Then you go find help. I'm semi-competent in statistics. The most competency I have is at a certain point, I recognize I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and I go to somebody and say, "Hey, help!" And that's valuable, but you ought to have some level of appreciation of the numbers in order to be able to do statistics. On the other hand, you're not expected to be an expert. And the same thing in systems. He's saying you have to appreciate a system. You don't have to be a systems thinking expert. So what else intrigues you in chapter 3? I recognize that Dr. Deming probably thought before he goes to chapter 4, which is sort of the crux of the book, where he's going to talk about the system of profound knowledge, he might want to introduce what he thinks a system is. I do like something in this chapter too that I always found fascinating, because we're so used to separating things and having competitions and rewards in order to make things happen. And we're so big on heroes and scapegoats, we don't recognize how many things we do that are cooperative in nature and hugely beneficial. And at the end of the chapter, near the end of the chapter, he has some common examples of cooperation. We think everything's a competition. And he brings up things like the time of day. It's time of day. We cooperate on agreeing on a time of day, dates, red and green traffic lights, a metric system, licensing processes or products to some company or another, companies making parts and products for each other, large data processing company doing work for small companies, all kinds of things. So he's got 15 examples of cooperation. And frankly, I think it's part of the capitalist nature, evidently, and the nature of markets, that there's a lot of looking at the competition. And because what you're looking for is competition, you find it everywhere. If you're not looking for it, if you're looking for cooperation, you can find it too. It's there. It's huge. I find it intriguing that for example, a soccer league, the National Women's Soccer League, it's highly competitive. Soccer's highly competitive. The whole thing's based on competition, as in is the NFL, as is the hockey league, as they're all based on competitions. And yet, do you know how much cooperation it takes to get a league established and running? Holy cow. The cooperation dwarfs the competition. And without the cooperation, there wouldn't be a competition. As a minimum, you have to agree on the rules of the sport, which takes cooperation. I found something, well, I was in college when I was messing around with something, probably ditching some class and doing something I'd rather do. But I discovered that experiments conducted in the Western world, Europe and the US in particular, tend to focus on something way different from at the time what those in the communist world were focusing on. A lot of the science in the communist world was focused on symbiosis, the interaction between two things. And in our end of the world, it would be studying one of those things or the other, but not the interaction. They purposely went after, I want to understand the interactions. That's really intriguing. And so it led my brain to believe that the capitalist idea of the solo hero was different from the socialist idea of some level of cooperation and interaction. I'm not claiming that one of those is better than the other. In fact, I'm thinking the combination is way better, and Russ Aikoff offered us that. He said, there's a whole bunch of stuff in this capitalistic society we live in that isn't capitalistic. He said, his definition of capitalism was the sources of production and service are owned by privately, and in quote socialism, the sources of production and service are owned by the government. And he offers in the US, you have to ask yourself the question, do you want firefighters and the sources associated with maintaining a fire department run by the government, or would you like it funded and run by private industry? And he goes in and talks to other things like that. We absolutely, as a quote capitalistic country, believe in socialism and prefer it for a lot of things. So the argument isn't whether it's socialistic or capitalistic. The argument is that something we want to do, or those are the people who are controlling the resources? Simple enough question, but we can't ask it because if you're a socialist, being a capitalist is bad, and if you're a capitalist, being a socialist is bad. So what the hell? Another negative about labels. The advantage of labels is they make everything simple, which means you don't have to think. Oh, that's socialist. I don't have to think about whether it's useful or not. It's socialism. Deming was accused of being a socialist, and one of his answers was he drew a normal curve on the blackboard and said, if this is the wealth distribution, as I understand it, the socialists are interested in taking a bunch of resources from these people at the top of the wealth curve and giving it to the people at the bottom. So we're narrowing the band. And Deming says, that's not what I believe in. I believe in moving the entire band to the right and increasing everybody's resources.
Man, I had a question on something and I can't find that stinking quote now. There's something about a system can't understand itself.
Yes.
So
he talks about that a lot.
Does that mean you always need someone from outside the system to kind of look at your system?
He offers in other places, I don't remember if there's anything in the New Economics, but he offers in other places that it doesn't require somebody from the outside to help your organization, but it requires a view outside the system. If you're viewing using the prevailing style of management and looking at your system, it's not valuable. You don't have to be outside the system to use Deming's profound knowledge to apply to your organization and help offer reasons for changes. The Russ Akoff used to use the example when talking about systems not understanding themselves. He talks about a person. He says a person cannot recognize the faults that he has, that he points out are faults that his neighbor has that he doesn't like. He doesn't understand that he has those. There's no way he understands he's doing the same thing. So he needs help from the outside. He either needs an outside view of himself, which is pretty hard to do, or he needs somebody else, which is probably why going to therapy might be of use to people.
Okay, because I see it like right under the paragraph that talks about lifelong learning. So I think that's what, yeah. And then Christopher said an outside lens, which helped me.
Yeah. It's outside view is definitely necessary, especially if you want to understand yourself.
Yeah, maybe that's why it's important to have someone like a coach. You mentioned therapist, but like a coach also kind of fits the role.
Executive
Mentor?
coaches.
Mentors.
Yeah. It's the current term is echo chamber. You can get in an echo chamber that just reinforces everything you already believe. Well, okay. How about learning something new? There isn't anything new. Well, yes, of course, there are thousands of things that are new. You just have to be interested in going after them. And frankly, people, a human trait is they want to learn. Despite the fact that the school system wants to drive out any chance they're going to learn, they don't stop learning. I found out when I was teaching that the kids always learned. They didn't always learn what I was teaching, but they always learned. And you couldn't stop them from learning. You can't. You can get of frustrated with learning the stuff you're forcing them to learn, but they're not going to stop learning. In fact, some of the most creative kids I bumped into were the ones who didn't want to do the work and found really great ways to get around it. Very clever. They learned something.
Oh, my non-compliant students, they're my favorite.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, you're going to do something in life because you're going to figure out a way to get this
Yeah.
task done, but not do this straight line path. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So now we're smarter about systems, maybe. The good news is you can get smarter yet. There's no such, as Donella Meadows pointed out, there's no such thing as understanding a system. There's learning to recognize what it is and to dance with it, but understanding is a whole nother thing. In fact, systems are kind of by their nature, if they're very big, they're not understandable. And that's why applying Deming's outside view
Certainly
over and over again to your system
there's no
allows you to make modifications that increase its effectiveness over and over again.
Maybe the part of the reason why systems are not understandable could be that it's a dynamic. Like things are constantly changing, and what you thought 2 weeks back is no longer true. It's so dynamic.
Yep.
These interdependencies and all that.
Yeah, and that's another thing with statistics. People say, well, I got this result in the past. So they decide since that result gave them, 90% of what they wanted, they're guaranteed if they do that in the future, they'll get 90% of what they wanted. I said, you might be really confident you're going to get a similar result, or you might be really worried you're not. Either way, you can't apply statistics to the future. What you can apply is your understanding of the subject area to say, I think I understand what causes all this. Are those causes likely to repeat themselves out in the future? And the more likely they are to repeat themselves, the more likely they are to get similar results. But that's not a statistically based decision. That's a subject matter expert understanding the likelihood of repeating the cause and effect, the cause and effects that led to where you got. And frankly, things have so many causes, and as you said, the system's dynamic. It's changing by the second. So you're always going to get variation. And the question is, what's the variation trying to tell you about the system? And it's the same thing in human performance. You're going to get variation in the performance. Instead of handing out rewards and punishments, you got to say, what the hell is that variation telling me about our system? Not about our people, about our system. I have a friend who introduced me to a great concept, and I don't remember where he got it, but he said, the system you have is perfectly designed to get the results you're getting. So if you don't like the results, you need to redesign the system. And we see that all over. You weren't getting those results yesterday. You're getting them today. Well, the executives used to tell me, oh, the system's broken. I said, why do you think that? Well, because look at the result. I said, the system's perfectly designed to give you that result. I don't know why you think it's broken. Well, I don't want that result. Well, okay, let's change the system. I used to claim that their problem was they thought their system was a Formula One racer. and they thought they were in a Formula One race. And what they just discovered is that the system they have isn't a Formula One racer. It's a Mercury Villager. And that Mercury Villager doesn't compete very well with Formula One. It's not a broken Mercury Villager. You need to change the car you've got if you want to do better in the race. Well, according to the timeline, we're over for this session, but as I said, we've got this geared up so we don't have to stop. It doesn't shut the damn thing down and make us go away. So if we have more to say, we can continue. I appreciate your time. All right, I'll get the recording. Well, I don't have the skills to do it, but the recording will get posted. So I'll let you know when it gets posted. And next week, let me see my notes to remember what chapters we're going to chase next week. We're going to look at chapter 4, which is all of, well, depends on what volume you have or what edition you have. It's somewhere around 20 pages. Could be more, could be less, but it's not huge. And it's about Deming's concept. And that concept came about, interestingly enough, in part because Claire Crawford Mason kept pressing him. She's the one that did If Japan Can, Why Can't We? And sort of introduced the U.S. to Deming way back when. And when Deming would talk about there's no substitute for knowledge, she said, what kind of knowledge? What knowledge? And Deming said, profound knowledge. So she says, what's profound knowledge? So sometime in the late 80s, he started thinking maybe he ought to document that. And so he did. Well, thank you for joining. And as I said, we'll save the recording and post it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.